Hello, and we're back to the Katie Sassine Show. And if you weren't tuned in for the first segment, today's topic and this week's topic is the week of the whistleblowers. And right now we're talking about Edward Snowden. We just reviewed how he fled to Hong Kong to reveal the documents of classified information from the Stellar Wind program of the NSA. And upon reaching out for help to WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, in I believe 2006, he decided to look for places where Snowden could seek asylum from the US government. And as you may or may not know, Julian Assange is actually confined to the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The latest news that I have is that he's still confined. I may or may not, I'm not 100% on this, but my research thus far shows that Julian Assange is confined in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he literally cannot go outside because of his founding of WikiLeaks, where people can report anonymous news in this database, which has become a big threat to intelligence agencies worldwide, because that means that there's an outlet in which their dissenters can expose their wrongdoings, which is not unconstitutional, but for some reason these whistleblowers are being labeled as criminals in the mainstream media and labeled as traitors. Now that's up to us to determine. I'm not saying it's one way or the other. I can't determine that on my own. It's up to all of us as the people to determine that. Now, in 2013, when Snowden escaped to Hong Kong, the people were protesting at the US consulate in Hong Kong. The people were very passionate about it. And I'd like y'all to see a video and just check out about a minute and a half of these protests in Hong Kong and what these people had to say about the situation.
His war is essentially one of security versus privacy and freedom, and that governments must draw a line of how far they could go. They can't claim national security as the umbrella excuse, the umbrella reason, and authoritarian governments can just do anything they want to in the cyberspace.
Yeah, I think Snowden absolutely did the right thing. He had insider knowledge of these surveillance programs, and I think at a great personal risk, he was willing to expose this to the world. I don't think he would benefit from this in any way.
Ultimately, it's hard to see how NSA spying can be justified legally or morally. So, despite my uncertainty overall, I'm pretty sure that that's wrong. So I guess that's why I'm here.
As you can see, people in Hong Kong were well informed of the situation that was going on, at least those that showed at the US consulate to protest the US wanting to hold Snowden accountable for espionage. And I would like to quote the woman in the video that spoke out. There were a couple American guys that spoke out against the issue of holding Snowden accountable for wrongs. But the woman who spoke out, she really struck a chord with me when she said that governments, she was referring to governments, can't claim national security as the umbrella excuse for infringing upon individuals' freedoms. authoritarian governments, and then she went on to say authoritarian governments can do anything they want in cyberspace. And it's all about security versus privacy and freedom. But is the infringement upon one's privacy without a warrant with probable cause, which is stated in the Fourth Amendment, should that even be up for debate? I mean, why are we having to deal with this issue? Why are we having to protest? Why are we having to fight for our privacy and our freedom? This should already be granted to us. Have we allowed our government to become authoritarian? Have we allowed our government to use security as an umbrella excuse to invade our privacy? We have, in my opinion. Let's talk about Snowden's escape, how he got out of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong wasn't going to take action. They delayed the process of transferring him to the United States, and rightfully so, because I think the people at the consulate actually thought the U.S. was wrong and what the U.S. was doing, and they were just as surprised by the NSA as Snowden was. And so they wanted to stand up for Snowden. Although they won't admit it, although they'll blame it on a paperwork issue, as stated in the first segment of the show, they said that the Americans had sent over a document with Snowden's name, with Snowden's incorrect middle name. It was listed as James instead of Joseph, and that was the reason for the delayed paperwork. And that is a valid excuse. You can't hold somebody hostage if they're listed as the wrong name. Now, I don't know what kind of other information was sent over as far as Social Security, etc., which I'm sure was, but that's a valid excuse. Now, the U.S. and its representatives, and I'm referring to Michael Hayden, former head of the CIA and NSA, they said that Hong Kong was disrespecting the U.S. basically by not sending Snowden back to the U.S. and facilitating him being sent back to the U.S. and brought before a court. So WikiLeaks, meanwhile, while he was in Moscow, they were looking for places, and I'm referring to Assange, Julian Assange, where Snowden could seek asylum from U.S. government. And as I revealed in the last part in the last segment, that destination was Moscow. So Snowden was actually accompanied in his escape from Hong Kong to Moscow by journalist or reporter for WikiLeaks, British reporter Sarah Harrison. And we've got a picture of Sarah Harrison we can show. Very nice looking young lady and very intelligent reporter for WikiLeaks. And Snowden even called her a ninja that helped him escape from Hong Kong. I suppose that she's a very clever woman, and she and Snowden had to go through a lot together in order to attain the asylum that he has now, the temporary asylum he has in Hong Kong. So Snowden and Harrison illegally left Hong Kong together, technically illegally. Snowden bought a ticket to India, so in order to hide their operations and their escape flights from the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and all U.S. intelligence, Snowden decided to divert them, and in order to do that, and with hopes to do that, he bought a ticket to India on his credit card for 2 days after the actual asylum flight was to take place out of Hong Kong to Moscow. And WikiLeaks, as stated by Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, bought over a dozen tickets out of Hong Kong in Snowden's name in order to do the same thing to hinder the U.S. from locating Snowden and Harrison. His destination, Moscow. And we have a beautiful background of Moscow right there. At the Moscow airport, when he and Harrison successfully arrived, and well, let's talk about how they left. They left the airport at Hong Kong, and the U.S. had failed to cancel Snowden's passport. Now, British citizen Sarah Harrison, that wasn't an issue for her. Her passport was good to go. But the U.S. failed to cancel Snowden's passport, so he was able to technically legally leave Hong Kong and go to Moscow. But by the time he got to Moscow, they caught on, but we'll get to that later. At the Moscow airport, when they arrived successfully, Snowden could not receive another boarding pass to Cuba due to U.S.'s cancellation of his passport. He was to go from Hong Kong to Moscow to Cuba at this point. So he did not board the plane to Cuba. A former CIA plane and U.S. prisoner transportation plane was actually awaiting Snowden to transport him as a fugitive back to the U.S. to be held accountable. Snowden was, however, in jurisdictions of Russia, and Snowden thought this was ironic that the U.S. would try to interfere with him while in Moscow because the jurisdictions of Russia, as Snowden said, were not particularly friendly with the U.S. But Vladimir Putin did publicly refuse Snowden's entry into Russia. Russian authorities, however, and this is all, it's all over the place, but Russian authorities, however, secretly offered Snowden a deal. He could leave the airport in exchange for working with a Russian intelligence agency, the FSB. Harrison claims that she knows that Snowden did not give any information while held by the FSB. And while held by the FSB, Snowden and Harrison were stuck in cruel and unusual conditions. In my opinion, they were stuck in an airport transit zone in one room with no windows for about a month, even without a shower. Snowden's dad was, during this time, contacted by the FBI, and Snowden's family has a history of military background. All of his, many of his predecessors have served in the military, and they're a very well-informed family when it comes to government and politics. So Snowden's dad, our government, was contacted, his dad was contacted by the FBI and was asked to travel to Moscow to meet with his son, probably to get some details out of his son that maybe the FSB wasn't able to get. There was a popular support through Snowden throughout Western Europe, not only at the consulate in Hong Kong where people protesting, but people everywhere were protesting, believing Snowden deserved protection and not imprisonment for his act of whistleblowing. Snowden filed for application for asylum in 21 different Western European democracies, but everyone denied him. Because who was the European Union under? They're under the U.S. So if the U.S. wasn't going to allow it, neither was Europe. What Snowden needed was a country that was willing to stand up to the U.S., who didn't feel like they owed so much to the U.S. to listen to its every order. Poland was the first to deny Snowden's asylum, and then France. Then Italy refused to respond, and that's according to Snowden. But there was one man, Presidente Evo Morales of Bolivia, who openly offered asylum to Snowden. We've got a picture of Evo Morales. Venezuela and Bolivia offered him asylum, but transportation there was not possible due to Europe's refusal under the jurisdiction of U.S. to help Snowden escape. And there's Presidente Evo Morales. President Evo Morales, he did not arrive in Moscow for the sake of Edward Snowden. He arrived in Moscow to discuss the summit of gas exporting countries and expressed that he offers Snowden asylum in Bolivia publicly as a surprise before leaving Moscow. Now, this was a great patriotic act by Evo Morales, and we'll get back to that in the next segment and continue on to what's going on with Snowden now and what politicians think of him. Thank you for tuning in to the Katie Sassine Show. Stay tuned in for more on Edward Snowden in segment 2, and please follow me at Katie FYNTV.
No matter what you're looking for in a vehicle, start your search at Schottenkirk Ford Jasper. We've simplified the process so you can move on to what matters, your family.
This is the big one, the 20% off MSRP model year-end clearance at Days Chevrolet in Jasper, with huge savings over $3,600 off the redesigned Malibu. Now just $20,400. Save over $8,600 off Silverado Crew Cab LT. Now just $33,500. 20% off new Chevys, right here, right now, at Days Chevrolet in Jasper.
Better days ahead, Days Chevrolet.
Find new roads.
El Rey and Ellijay.
El Rey Mexican Restaurant.
Family owned and operated, and a local favorite for families, parties, and meetings.
Great prices.
Friendly service and delicious Mexican cuisine.
Patio dining available.
Come sing in Carlos's Cantina every Friday 9 to 1.
Eat in or take away.
Same location for 14 years. Open 7 days at the corner of Maddox Drive and 515. North Georgia's favorite Mexican cuisine. El Rey and Ellijay.
Pizza Hut makes the best pizza in the entire universe, but they won't tell you that. I've been marooned on this planet for a while now. You are an impressive race. Your children know excellent hiding places. Your oceans aren't filled with lava. And you figured out how to combine a grilled cheese sandwich with a Pizza Hut pizza. Surely interstellar travel will soon follow. And then I can finally get back home. Round. Round like home. The grilled cheese stuffed crust pizza. Proof that no one out-pizzas the Hut.
Hello, my name is Chad Watkins. I'm the manager at Larry's Body Shop. We are a family-owned and operated business and have been serving the North Georgia area since 1978. We are located at 1216 Progress Road in Ellijay, Georgia. Our shop specializes in collision repair and we work with all major insurance companies. Larry's Body Shop is ICAR Gold, the highest role of training recognized by the collision repair industry. It is estimated that only 10% of collision shops meet these standards. Our shop consists of state-of-the-art equipment such as laser measurement system, down-drive spray booth, spot and MIG welding equipment. All of our paints are mixed on-site so that we can guarantee your paint to match every time. I know that having an accident can be a stressful event. We take pride in making sure our customers are satisfied with the repair of their vehicles. Our waiting area is clean and comfortable with free Wi-Fi and refreshing beverages. So if you're in an accident, stop by and see us at Larry's Body Shop.
North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds. Come on in to view the area's largest selection of fine jewelry at North Georgia Diamond. All repairs and designs are done on-site by our jewelers. And North Georgia Diamond has the lowest prices on loose diamonds. You can also sell your gold, silver, and coins at North Georgia Diamond between Walmart and Lowe's in East Ellijay. Locally owned by Bill and Allison Craig, North Georgia Diamond is your source for diamonds in North Georgia.
What you gonna do with all that junk?
Welcome back to the Katie Sassine Show, addressing the indoctrination of the American nation. And this is the week of the Whistleblowers. In segment 1, we began discussing Edward Snowden, popular American citizen, notorious for being a traitor. So, is he a traitor? Is he a hero? Well, that's up to us, upon the facts that have been given thus far, which you can check out in episode 1 from this week. And upon the facts that I will present today in this episode, we can determine for ourselves what we think of Snowden, of course, as individuals of the Republic that has become a democracy. Last week I was given a comment on my show about saying that the U.S. was a democracy, that I said that, when in fact it's a republic. But I would like to point out the fact that we're not operating as a republic, which is why I address us as a democracy. So I will address us as a democracy until further changes take place in which we become a republic again. So we last left off talking about Presidente Evo Morales of Bolivia. He is the man who spoke out and offered Julian Assange asylum. And we can pull up that picture of Evo Morales again for everyone to see here. So he was bold in the fact that he offered Snowden asylum when everyone in Western Europe, and probably, I can't say for sure, but more likely than not under the jurisdiction of the U.S. and the dictation of the U.S., everyone in Western Europe rejected him asylum. But Venezuela, and notably Bolivian President Evo Morales, openly offered Snowden asylum, which was a very bold move. However, as I stated in the last segment, transportation there was going to be impossible due to Europe's collective refusal to help Snowden, as they had prior rejected his asylum. 21 different Western European countries had rejected Snowden's asylum. It was apparent that they weren't willing to help this guy, that they looked at Snowden as a traitor, and that he should be accountable and held accountable by the U.S. government and go back home and go before court before being pardoned or imprisoned or whatever his fate was. So when President Evo Morales of Bolivia arrived in Moscow in 2013, while Snowden was there in asylum, he was there for an international summit of gas exporting countries, and he decided to express that he offers Snowden asylum in Bolivia publicly before the media and before leaving Moscow. So because of Morales' bold offer, the FBI thought it necessary to intervene, and maybe they did this just to intimidate Morales, or maybe they really thought that this was going to happen. But the FBI thought that Snowden would escape from Moscow with Morales in his presidential jet, because presidential jets have special diplomatic status. And when they fly in the air, they're protected just as much as a state is protected within its borders. The plane is considered a state as far as its protection goes. However, Morales' plane was not given this protection as it should have, and it was forced to land in Europe and be searched for Snowden. I believe it landed in France, but I would have to check up to be 100% sure. I want to say it landed in France, but it was forced to land in Europe, bottom line, where Snowden was unwelcome and rejected asylum in, as I said, 21 European countries. So this really revealed a power structure, the fact that European citizens were standing up and protesting for Snowden, for freedom for Snowden. And Europe was rejecting Snowden. Now, this showed the power structure because it was the U.S. that determined, the U.S. government that determined that he is a traitor and that he has committed acts against the U.S. government under the Espionage Act, and he should be imprisoned probably is what they desired, or at least, go before the courts. And why didn't Snowden just stay in the U.S. and be held accountable? Well, before Snowden, there was Brandon, now known as Chelsea Manning, who was given a sentence of 120 years for leaking classified information. So Snowden was deterred to come clean to the U.S. government because of what had happened with the Manning case. And we'll discuss a little bit about that later. But he was rightfully, he was well incentivized to leave the country upon revealing the Stellar Wind program of the NSA. He was very well incentivized for the sake of keeping his freedom. He didn't want to be in prison for the rest of his life. He didn't want a 120-year life sentence like Chelsea Manning had received, former member of the U.S. Army, and former soldier. So Morales' plane, let's get back to the scene here. Morales' plane with special diplomatic status was forced to land in Europe and be searched for Snowden. And this revealed a power structure that Western Europe is under control of the U.S. And in order to combat this and Morales' flight being stopped, WikiLeaks purposely portrayed false routes of the Morales flight to create more trails for surveillance, to separate the intelligence programs, to mitigate the possibility of them stopping Morales, who was innocent and did not have anyone hidden in his plane, any fugitive hidden in his plane. He did publicly offer asylum, but he didn't betray any country and sneak Snowden on his plane. He wasn't willing to go that far, but the fact that the U.S. would make him stop his plane and force him to land in order to search his plane was very excessive, because he rightfully has diplomatic status. And by forcing him to land in Europe, they disrespected Morales. Morales didn't say he was going to take off with Snowden in a plane. That would be one thing with his diplomatic status. He only said that he offered him asylum. So the fact that they made Morales' plane land in Europe to be searched for Snowden was a little bit out there. So when was this temporary asylum officially granted? Well, Federal Migration Services granted Snowden temporary asylum for 1 year. And this was granted while Snowden and Harrison were still in that one room of the airport under the FSB, the Russian intelligence agency. And after being in that room with no windows for a month, they were finally granted to leave the airport and have asylum in Moscow. And after this occurred, and they were granted this asylum for 1 year, which he still is in Moscow to this day, 4 years later, excuse me, more like 3 years later, the U.S. government claimed to be disappointed in the Russian government. The U.S. government also claimed Edward Snowden is not a whistleblower. They referred to him as merely a traitor. He betrayed his government by revealing their techniques of collecting data. So Sarah Harrison, who accompanied Edward Snowden on his journey, she's a British journalist, she's a WikiLeaks reporter. She was not one of the initial reporters that met Snowden at the hotel. We've got a picture of Sarah Harrison we showed in the last segment, just to give you all a look of who she is. She took charge of what WikiLeaks called, as I may or may not have said before in this segment, Sarah Harrison was not only a British journalist, she was a WikiLeaks reporter. So by the orders of Julian Assange, she took charge of the Operation Asylum. Operation Asylum was to seek asylum for Edward Snowden, and she accompanied Snowden in his escape out of Hong Kong. Snowden asked Harrison, because of the high risk of the situation, Snowden thought it was very peculiar that a woman was willing to risk her life to help someone, and he even asked Harrison, according to Harrison, why did you do this? Why did you help me? Sarah essentially put her life on the line, and Snowden said, this is a quote of Snowden, Sarah put her life on the line for someone who was a complete stranger to her. Edward Snowden was a complete stranger to her at the time. All she knew was his story. She didn't know him personally. He wasn't a member of her family. There was no personal connection. She thought that what was happening to him was unjust, and she wanted to help him seek asylum because she believed that he was rightfully going about what he was doing. And then we have Michael Hayden. Michael Hayden is the man who is speaking for the CIA and the NSA. He's a former head of the CIA and the NSA. We've got a photo of Hayden And he ran the Stellar Wind program that Snowden exposed. And again, if you weren't here for the first segment, the Stellar Wind program permitted the search of any individual's communications for the purpose of security against terrorism. Here's a quote from Hayden on Snowden. He said of Snowden that Snowden believed his ethical and legal judgment trumped the judgment of his coworkers, and so on, the American president, and so on, the court system, and everyone else. That was Hayden on Snowden. Hayden thinks of Snowden as actually arrogant, not heroic, for taking it upon himself to report the NSA's breach of individual privacy. Now, this is getting very heated, and it's up to us to determine what we think. Is he a traitor or a hero? And that's still debated among politicians today. It was in the previous presidential debates, at least in the Democratic debate. There's footage of that. And we do know Trump's stance on this issue and Obama's, which I will present to you on the next part of the show. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at KatieFYNTV and email me with comments and suggestions at katie@fetchyournews.com. Thank you, and I'll see you in just a bit.